The night was still, the grand halls of Don Vincenzo Moretti's mansion soaked in silence before the sudden thunder of a gunshot shattered it. A figure collapsed near the marble staircase, blood pouring onto the ivory floor, and shadows trembled in the candlelight. Panic erupted among the guards, their heavy boots clattering against polished tiles as the smell of gunpowder lingered. The phone in the old man's trembling hand blinked with a single message: "It's done. The king is dead." A chill swept through the air as Betrayal settled in, more deadly than the bullet. Anthony Russo said, "We've lost him. The empire will burn." The mansion, once an untouchable fortress, had become a tomb of loyalty broken. Michael Romano stood in the corner, eyes hollow, heart beating violently, knowing the war had just begun. Nothing in this world of power and deceit would remain the same, and tonight's blood marked the opening act of chaos. The rain had not stopped, each droplet hammering against shattered glass as chaos turned into silence. The mansion, once a fortress, felt hollow, a graveyard for loyalty and power. Guards whispered, unsure who had fired the fatal shot, each suspicion heavier than the storm outside. Michael Romano stood near the cracked window, staring at the city lights in the distance, realizing that Vincenzo's death was not random. It was calculated. Anthony Russo said, "This was no outsider. The bullet came from within." His words pierced deeper than the thunder, sparking doubt in every soul present. Betrayal had taken root in the very heart of the empire. Michael's chest tightened, haunted by ghosts of loyalty, the bitter taste of fear mixing with the storm's cold breath. Somewhere in the silence, power shifted, unseen hands pulling strings. The underworld was about to devour itself, and blood would be its only language. The body of Don Vincenzo Moretti was laid upon a crimson-draped table, candles flickering as shadows danced over his lifeless face. Men who once swore eternal loyalty now shifted uneasily, whispering doubts that cracked their vows. Michael Romano's mind raced, replaying every word Vincenzo had spoken in secret meetings. Trust, once solid, now felt poisoned. Anthony Russo said, "If Vincenzo fell, none of us are safe. The empire will tear itself apart." The room smelled of wax, smoke, and betrayal, each breath thick with unease. Old portraits of ancestors glared from walls, as though condemning the treachery of this night. Michael clenched fists, heart burning with dread, knowing a silent war had begun. In the shadows, unseen enemies smiled, ready to feast on the corpse of an empire once feared by all. In the dim-lit chamber, Michael Romano traced the cracks in the marble wall, each fracture a mirror of his breaking trust. The silence was broken only by the storm outside, yet inside the mansion, whispers brewed like venom. Anthony Russo leaned close, voice low, "This family bleeds from within, not without." The words sent shivers, heavier than thunder. Guards shifted uneasily, their eyes darting between faces, wondering who among them was the Judas. Michael felt his chest tighten, memories of brotherhood dissolving into shadows of suspicion. The empire built on loyalty had become a stage for betrayal, and every player wore a mask. Michael whispered to himself, "If trust dies tonight, so does the family." The mansion seemed to breathe with unease, walls echoing the weight of secrets too heavy to stay buried. The storm eased, but its fury lingered in the mansion's hollow halls. Michael Romano walked slowly through corridors lined with shattered glass, his footsteps echoing like the toll of a funeral bell. Don Vincenzo's portrait hung at the end of the hall, its frame cracked, glass splintered. Anthony Russo said, "The king is gone, but his enemies live among us." Each word was a dagger. Michael's pulse quickened, torn between fear and determination. Tonight had proven that no throne was eternal, no empire immune. Shadows shifted on the walls, the mansion alive with secrets and ghosts. Michael whispered, "This is not the end. It's the beginning of the purge." Beyond the broken windows, the city lights flickered like dying stars, as though the underworld itself trembled for what was about to come. The rain eased, but the morning had only begun as Don Vincenzo Moretti's coffin rested beneath flickering candles, guarded by loyal men who now whispered betrayal. The air was heavy with incense and suspicion, every silence sharpened like a blade. Michael Romano stood near the altar, eyes scanning the faces of rival dons who came not to grieve, but to measure the Empire's weakness. Anthony Russo said, "These men smell blood, Michael. They'll carve the kingdom before it's cold." Michael clenched his jaw, feeling the weight of every stare burning into him. Behind veils of black wives and daughters wept, but the tears did little to wash away the venomous smiles exchanged by the hungry. Death had opened doors, and the wolves prowled with eager steps, their shadows long across marble floors. Michael whispered, "This funeral is not mourning. It's the first war council." The service ended, but the storm inside the cathedral spilled into whispers at the courtyard. Marco Belandi, the rival Don, stood under the archway with his men, every word dripping arrogance. He eyed Michael like prey, his voice calm but venomous. "The throne is empty, Romano. You'll either kneel or bleed." Michael's heart thumped, rage boiling under restraint, but Anthony gripped his shoulder tightly. Guards shifted nervously, their hands close to pistols, eyes darting. The marble courtyard, wet with rain, became an arena of glances sharper than knives. A single wrong move would turn prayer into bloodshed. Michael said, "This empire wasn't built on your ambition, Belandi. It won't be buried with Vincenzo." Belandi smirked, silence folding around them like a noose. The war had not yet begun, but tonight it was promised. The gathering moved into a lavish dining hall, where chandeliers glowed above tables filled with untouched food. Michael Romano sat among men who once swore loyalty to Vincenzo, yet their smiles felt hollow, their toasts dripping with betrayal. Sofia Accardi entered, the ally no one expected, her presence drawing whispers across the room. She leaned close to Michael, her voice sharp. "You don't belong in their game, Romano, but you'll drown if you don't play." Michael's jaw tightened, his gaze sweeping over Marco Belandi, exchanging quiet words with Don Vital, another predator circling. Anthony Russo muttered, "This isn't dinner, it's a feeding frenzy." Glasses clinked, but every sound was a threat disguised as a toast. Michael whispered, "Let them drink. Tomorrow, they'll choke." Later that night, the mansion halls echoed with conspiracies whispered behind closed doors. Michael Romano walked past thick wooden doors where rival dons plotted their moves, his ears catching fragments of deceit. Anthony Russo said, "They're carving the empire piece by piece. If you don't act, they'll erase the Moretti name." Michael's fists clenched as he passed Don Vital's study, hearing laughter at Vincenzo's fall. In the courtyard, Sofia Accardi confronted him, her eyes burning with urgency. "You can't save them all, Michael. Pick your side before they pick your grave." The rain had stopped, but the air was heavier than ever. Michael whispered to himself, "If betrayal is the language of power, then I'll answer in blood." The night closed with a gathering in Vincenzo's private chamber, now a battlefield of whispers. Rival dons debated inheritance like vultures circling flesh. Marco Belandi leaned forward, eyes cold. "Without Vincenzo, the crown has no heir." Michael Romano slammed his palm on the table, rage simmering. "The Moretti blood still runs. This empire won't fall to jackals." Silence followed, the weight of defiance electrifying the room. Anthony Russo said, "You've just painted a target on your back." Sofia Accardi's eyes lingered on Michael, a flicker of respect hidden in the storm. Outside, the city lights shimmered like warning fires. Tonight, Michael declared war without a single bullet, and tomorrow, the streets would answer in blood. The streets of Naples burned with whispers. As Michael Romano walked through the narrow alleys, shadows pressing close. The murder of Don Vincenzo had left the city trembling, and loyalty began to rot under fear. Anthony Russo said, "Every man carries two faces now, Michael. One for trust, the other for betrayal." Michael's scarred face hardened as he saw men he once trusted exchange glances too sharp to be innocent. The enforcer, Carlo De Luca, stalked nearby like a predator, his silent presence a warning that the syndicate's law was still iron. Michael clenched his fists, knowing fear would keep some in line, but betrayal was already spreading like fire. His voice was steady, but his heart raged. If loyalty cracks, the empire will bleed before it ever falls. Inside a smoky club, laughter drowned beneath the tension of hidden deals. Michael Romano leaned against the bar, his gaze locked on Marco Belandi shaking hands with a man from a rival cartel. Anthony whispered, "Belandi is feeding the wolves." Michael's jaw tightened as Sofia Accardi slid beside him, her eyes sharp as blades. She said, "Trust is a luxury you can't afford." The music throbbed, but each note sounded like a funeral march. Michael's chest burned with the truth. Loyalty was dying here, traded for power and promises. He whispered, "Every smile in this room is a blade waiting for my back." The docks reeked of salt and diesel as Michael Romano watched crates unloaded under cover of night. Anthony Russo muttered, "Weapons. Belandi arms his betrayal." Michael's eyes narrowed as Carlo De Luca oversaw the shipment, his face carved from stone. Michael stepped forward, voice cold. Even Vincenzo wouldn't stomach this. Carlo turned slowly, his silence louder than a confession. The enforcer's eyes met Michael's, a storm of violence beneath restraint. Anthony whispered, "He won't speak. His loyalty is in blood, not words." Michael felt the crack widening. If the enforcer wavered, the empire itself would fracture. Michael Romano returned to Vincenzo's study, the old walls heavy with memory. The portraits glared down as though mocking his struggle. Sofia Accardi said, "Your allies plot in shadows, your enemies dine in your halls. Where do you stand?" Michael's eyes darkened, the weight of betrayal clawing deeper. Anthony Russo whispered, "If Belandi moves first, blood will flood these streets." Michael touched the cracked desk, Vincenzo's old seat of power, and whispered, "If the family rots from within, then I'll burn the infection out." Silence followed, as though the room itself had swallowed his oath. That night, the betrayal struck close. Michael Romano found one of his men lifeless in an alley, throat cut, eyes staring wide in shock. Anthony Russo said, "Belandi sends messages in blood." Michael knelt, fists trembling, rage boiling over grief. Sofia Accardi appeared from shadows, her voice steady. "This is the beginning. They'll pick you apart piece by piece." Michael's heart thundered, his whisper sharp as a blade. Then it'll cut deeper. The alley reeked of death, and in the silence, Michael knew loyalty had died with his man. From this night forward, trust was no longer a shield, but a weapon sharpened by betrayal. The Moretti estate was draped in silence, but it was not peace. It was a silence thick with betrayal. Michael Romano sat in Don Vincenzo's old study, staring at letters unearthed from a hidden drawer. The handwriting was familiar, a ghost from his childhood. The words burned into him, secret meetings, coded promises, and the signature of his younger brother, Luca Romano. Anthony Russo entered, his voice low. "I told you, Michael. Betrayal always bleeds from the closest vein." Michael's chest tightened as he gripped the paper, his scar pulling with the fury on his face. He whispered, "Blood should bind, not sever. If this is true, Luca is the knife in our back." The chandelier above flickered as though the house itself recoiled. Michael knew this revelation was no rumor. It was the first crack in the very soul of his family. At a candlelit gathering, Michael Romano confronted the Dons, his fury masked beneath calm words. He laid the letters on the table, silence gripping the room as names were read aloud. Marco Belandi smirked. "Even your blood betrays you, Romano. The empire dies from the inside." Anthony Russo's hand hovered near his coat, sensing violence ready to erupt. Sofia Accardi leaned closer, whispering into Michael's ear, "If you show weakness now, they'll devour you whole." Michael slammed his hand on the table, his voice steady but venomous. "My brother may bleed my name, but he will not bury it." The room trembled with the unspoken truth. The war was no longer against rivals, but against the very heart of the Romano bloodline. Later that night, Michael stood alone in the rain-soaked cemetery, staring at Don Vincenzo's grave. The storm above mirrored the chaos within. Anthony Russo joined him, muttering, "If Luca sides with Belandi, the city is lost." Michael's eyes burned with a storm of rage and sorrow. He whispered, "I raised him from boy to man. Now he raises a blade to me." Sophia Accardi appeared under her black umbrella, her voice calm but sharp. Sometimes blood must be spilled to save blood. Michael's fists tightened, rain dripping from his scarred face. The choice before him was no longer about vengeance. It was about survival. And survival demanded a price higher than family ties. Inside an abandoned warehouse, Michael Romano finally came face to face with his brother Luca Romano. The younger man's eyes were sharp, but his smile was poisoned with ambition. Luca said, "The empire was never yours, Michael. I'll take what Vincenzo denied you." Michael's rage trembled in silence as Anthony Russo raised his pistol, but Michael raised a hand to stop him. He whispered, "I won't kill blood in shadows." Luca's laughter echoed, sharp and cruel. "Then you've already lost." Sophia Accardi's gaze flickered between them, her voice low. "This is no brotherhood, it's war disguised as family." Michael's chest ached as he realized that tonight, bloodlines shattered into enemies. The confrontation spread like wildfire. Rumors of Luca's betrayal tore through the streets, and the Moretti Empire fractured overnight. Michael Romano sat in the shattered hall of Vincenzo's mansion, blood dripping from his knuckles after a night of violent skirmishes. Anthony Russo said, "The city bleeds, Michael. This is only the beginning." Sophia Accardi stood by the window, her silhouette sharp against lightning outside, whispering, "Belandi will use Luca to gut you, and if you hesitate, he'll succeed." Michael rose slowly, his eyes dark with vengeance. "Then let them come. I'll cut down Belandi, and I'll face Luca with my own hand." The storm outside screamed in unison with his vow. For the first time, Michael knew that family no longer meant loyalty. It meant war. The night was heavy with smoke inside an abandoned opera house where Michael Romano gathered his closest allies. The shattered chandeliers above glistened faintly in the moonlight, casting fractured beams across torn velvet seats. Anthony Russo muttered, "Belandi isn't acting alone, he's fed by something bigger." Sophia Accardi placed a dossier on the table, her tone sharp. "Politicians, cartels, corporations. This isn't a family war, it's global." Michael's scar caught the light as he leaned forward, whispering, "So Vincenzo wasn't just a king, he was a pawn." The revelation clawed at him, every word dripping with betrayal deeper than blood. Outside, thunder rattled the broken glass, echoing the truth. Michael had been fighting shadows while giants pulled the strings. The dossier revealed faces of men in suits, smiling in photographs with leaders of nations. Michael Romano flipped each page with trembling hands, seeing layers of corruption reaching beyond borders. Sophia Accardi said, "The Moretti Empire was only one spoke in their wheel." Anthony's voice was grim. "If this is true, killing Belandi means nothing. We're chasing ghosts too powerful to touch." Michael's chest tightened, the weight of futility pressing against his rage. He whispered, "Then we don't fight to win, we fight to expose." Lightning cracked through the opera house, as though the world itself mocked his vow. The hidden empire was no longer a rumor. It was a labyrinth with no clear exit. Michael Romano walked through the gilded corridors of a private club hidden in the city's heart. Wealth dripped from the walls. Golden sconces, marble floors, paintings of men who had shaped nations. But in the lounge sat Belandi with foreign dons, his laughter echoing like thunder. Anthony Russo whispered, "He's already sold the city." Sophia Accardi leaned close. "These aren't just criminals, they're gatekeepers of the world's blood money." Michael's gaze hardened, scar twitching with fury. He muttered, "Then we burn their gates." The air smelled of cigars and betrayal, every polished corner reflecting a world too powerful to collapse, yet fragile under truth. That night, Michael Romano confronted Sophia on the rooftop above the city, the neon lights below flickering like dying stars. His voice was sharp. "How long have you known?" Sophia's eyes narrowed, her tone steady, "Long enough to know you can't win alone." Anthony Russo arrived, his voice biting, "Or maybe she's playing both sides." Michael's heart pounded with doubt, the betrayal cutting deeper than any blade. Sophia stepped closer, whispering, "I'm not your enemy, Michael. I'm your only chance." The wind howled, carrying the weight of her words. In that moment, Michael realized alliances were no longer about loyalty. They were about survival against a storm too vast to face alone. The revelation struck like fire. Michael Romano was a pawn in a game played by faceless titans. In Vincenzo's old chamber, he stood before cracked portraits, fists bloodied from rage. Anthony Russo said, "You can't fight the world, Michael. You'll drown." Sofia Accardi's eyes locked with his, her voice sharp. "Then don't fight for power. Fight for the truth." Michael's chest heaved, the ghosts of loyalty and betrayal colliding within him. He whispered, "If I burn, I'll burn with their secrets. Let the world choke on their truth." Thunder rattled the mansion's bones, a storm answering his oath. Michael was no longer just a soldier in a family war. He had become the blade against an empire too vast to comprehend. The storm raged above the isolated Moretti estate, lightning tearing open the sky as Michael Romano led Anthony Russo and Sofia Accardi through the gates. The once grand palace now stood like a mausoleum of power, its windows glowing faintly with the promise of bloodshed. Inside, Marco Bellandi's laughter echoed, joined by Luca Romano's voice, a twisted echo of family betrayal. Anthony muttered, "The jackals feast in your father's house." Michael's scar burned under the storm's light, his grip tightening on the pistol hidden beneath his coat. He whispered, "This ends tonight, no matter who bleeds." Sophia's sharp eyes scanned the shadows, her tone steady, "Then be ready to kill your brother." Each step across the marble felt like treading on the graves of loyalty, the empire itself waiting to ignite into flames. The grand hall blazed with firelight as Marco Bellandi raised a glass, surrounded by his soldiers. Luca Romano stood at his side, his smirk sharp as the dagger at his belt. Michael burst through the doors, his voice slicing through the feast. "This house is mine, not your throne of betrayal." Bellendi laughed, his tone dripping arrogance. "The empire bends to the one with blood in his hands, not ghosts on his tongue." Luca leaned forward, his words cruel. "Brother, Vincenzo trusted me, not you. You were always his shadow." Michael's pulse hammered, the weight of family against family pressing down like a blade to the throat. Anthony whispered, "Say the word, and we burn them all." Sophia's hand rested on her pistol, her eyes never leaving Luca's smirk. The hall pulsed with tension, the feast now a battlefield. Gunfire shattered the silence, bullets tearing through the chandeliers as glass rained down like deadly stars. Michael dove behind a marble pillar, returning fire as Bellandi's men stormed forward. Anthony yelled over the chaos, "We can't hold them long." Michael's jaw clenched, his voice sharp. "Then we take Bellandi's head before we fall." Lucas' laughter rang above the carnage, his pistol flashing as he called out, "Come, brother, let's end this bloodline tonight." Sophia's eyes blazed as she fired with precision, dropping one guard after another. The hall burned with smoke and firelight, every corner soaked in betrayal. Michael's heart thundered, torn between vengeance and survival, knowing that the next move would decide not just his fate, but the future of the Moretti name. The hall burned as Michael Romano chased Luca into the upper chambers, their footsteps thundering across cracked marble. Luca's voice echoed through the corridors, taunting, "You were never family, only Vincenzo's failure." Michael's rage boiled as he followed, pistol trembling in his grip. Anthony struggled below, pinned by Bellandi's forces, while Sophia's gunfire echoed in defiance. At last, Michael cornered Luca in Vincenzo's private office, the ancestral portraits watching like silent judges. Luca raised his pistol, eyes gleaming with cruelty. "This is where the Moretti line ends." Michael's voice broke with fury and sorrow. "No, this is where betrayal dies." The storm outside roared, lightning flashing through shattered glass, casting both brothers in fractured light as they prepared to strike. The final clash erupted in blood and thunder. Michael Romano fired, disarming Luca with a shot that tore through his brother's hand. Luca screamed, falling against Vincenzo's portrait, the crimson splattering across the family legacy. Marco Bellandi stormed in, pistol raised, but Sofia's bullet struck his chest, silencing his reign in one sharp gasp. Anthony staggered in, bloody but alive, his voice hoarse. It's over, Michael. The Empire is ash. Michael dropped his weapon, his chest heaving, staring at Luca writhing in pain. His whisper trembled. Family should have saved us. But family destroyed us. Thunder shook the estate as silence fell, the war won but hollow, the cost etched forever in Michael's scar, and in the ruins of the Moretti name. The storm had passed, leaving the Moretti estate in ruins. Michael Romano walked through the shattered hall, his boots crunching glass, each step echoing like a funeral march. Bodies of Belande's men sprawled lifeless, the air thick with smoke and the stench of blood. Anthony Russo leaned against the wall, wounded but alive, whispering, "We won, Michael. But it feels like nothing." Michael's gaze fell to his brother Luca, trembling in agony, his once defiant eyes now filled with defeat. Sofia Accardi stood in silence, her pistol still smoking, her face unreadable. Michael whispered, "Victory is hollow when family is buried with it." He stared at Vincenzo's cracked portrait, its painted eyes lifeless under bloodstains. For the first time, silence felt heavier than the storm. The Empire was gone, and so was its soul. The city below burned with rumors as Michael Romano and Anthony Russo drove through darkened streets. Storefronts shuttered, whispers carried on the wind. "The kingpins are dead." Anthony winced, clutching his wound, saying, "The families will scatter like rats." Michael's scarred face reflected in the rain-streaked window, his voice low, "And the rats will rebuild in shadows." Sofia Accardi's sharp eyes flicked to him from the back seat, her tone heavy, "You cut the head, but the body still crawls." The neon lights of Naples blurred through the rain, casting fractured colors across Michael's face. He whispered, "Then I'll live knowing I killed ghosts, not monsters." The car rolled on, carrying not triumph, but the hollow weight of survival. At dawn, Michael Romano stood by the docks, the sea wind carrying the scent of salt and ash. Fishermen watched silently as soldiers loaded bodies into vans, erasing the night's war. Anthony Russo approached, his voice hoarse, "This city won't remember your mercy, only your fire." Michael's gaze lingered on the rising sun, whispering, "Mercy was buried with Vincenzo." Sofia Accardi stepped close, her tone cutting, "You didn't end the Empire. You only passed it to shadows bigger than yourself." Michael's chest tightened as gulls cried overhead, mocking the silence in his heart. The sea glimmered gold, but to Michael, it looked like blood stretched endless across the horizon. He knew then that victory was an illusion, and survival the cruelest curse. Michael Romano returned to Vincenzo's chamber, now stripped bare, the walls cracked and stained with smoke. Anthony Russo slumped in a chair, exhaustion carving deep lines into his face. Sofia Accardi stood at the broken window, her eyes on the ruined courtyard. Michael touched the cracked desk, whispering, "This was never a throne. It was a cage." Anthony muttered, "And now you're free. But freedom costs more than chains." Sofia turned, her tone icy, "The war ends only when you stop fighting ghosts." Michael's eyes hollowed, his whisper trembling, "Then the war will never end." The chamber's silence pressed down, heavy with ghosts of power and betrayal, leaving Michael more prisoner than victor. That night, Michael Romano walked alone through the ruins of the estate, his silhouette swallowed by darkness. The Empire was ash, the enemies buried. But the scars burned deeper than any wound. In the silence, a phone rang from the hall, its shrill cry echoing like fate itself. Michael paused, his eyes hollow, his voice low, "The war may be over, but the cost is eternal." The ringing grew louder, filling the void as he walked into the night. Lightning flickered, casting his shadow long across the broken courtyard. The world outside waited, hungry for power, ready to swallow the last Romano. He disappeared into the storm, his footsteps fading into the night's abyss, leaving only the unanswered call and the haunting silence of victory without redemption.